Get appalled at. I'm blacker than Nina the Samoan. I just want freedom and want all these people left alone. How in the world is that chapping you? Laughable, you catch an attitude. Glad that you going back.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. So today I come across an interesting question on Twitter. It's a Twitter meme. Which was the greatest mistake by WCW? And there's 8 mistakes. There is overexpanding the NWO, giving Hulk Hogan creative control, the finger push of doom, ending Goldberg's streak when it was the best thing they had going, hiring Vince Russo, making Kevin Nash a booker, allowing these guys, Saturn, Guerrero, Benoit, and Malenko, to quit, or putting the title on David Arquette. What was the greatest mistake of WCW? So this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about each one of these things as I remember them. And we're going to try to rank these things on a scale of 1 to 10, and which one was the greatest mistake. Well, let's just do 1 out of 8. Let's put them in a list. Let's create a list. This will all be off the top of my head, by the way. All right, so in doing so, are also going to take into account context, meaning what was going on in wrestling when this decision was made. So, when this decision was made. Okay, so number 8 of this list. Looking at this list, the one thing that was not really a mistake that they made was letting Saturn, Guerrero, Malenko, and Benoit go. Now, I know a lot of people may say, look, these guys were the backbone. This is the Guerrero quote saying that they were the backbone of WCW. When they quit, when the cruiserweights got gutted and everything, the company collapsed, which is partly true. But here's the thing. There was nobody here at this point in time in their careers, which was 2000, late 99, 2000. None of them were going to change the game. Not one of them. Eric Bischoff was not wrong when he fired Steve Austin, right? He didn't know that the guy was going to end up being one of the biggest superstars of all time. Completely different scenario than when Vern Gagne pissed off Hulk Hogan and Hulk Hogan left. He knew how important Hulk Hogan was to his territory. You know, he was actually working with Hogan on top. He saw Hogan in Japan. He knew that Hogan was drawing tons of money for the AWA, and then he kept screwing him, kept messing him over, kept trying to take more money from him. So Vern Gagne made a huge mistake. Vince didn't know that turning Hogan heel was going to be a big deal. He had no idea. For him, Hulkamania was the golden goose. Once he was like, look, there's no more juice in Hulk Hogan at all. And to be quite honest, just turning Hogan heel isn't what worked. I've done videos before talking about what really made Hulk Hogan work. If I didn't do that video, then remind me in the comment section. I'm pretty sure I did. And we're going to have to discuss why Hulk Hogan's heel turn was so damn successful. But I'm pretty sure I talked about it on this channel before, why Hulk Hogan's heel turn was more successful than if he just turned heel. When you look at the careers of the 4 guys that they left, the Radicals, none of them was an immediate game changer. Benoit was the world champion right before he left, but he had never really mixed in with any of the top guys. Eddie Guerrero had short feuds with Ric Flair, but he never really mixed in with the top guys. Malenko never mixed in with the top guys. Perry Saturn never mixed in with the top guys. If these guys had went 2 or 3 months without being on Nitro, nobody would have noticed. Nobody would have been like, hey, where's Dean Malenko? Where did he go? Because they weren't the draw. They weren't the interesting part of the show. Nobody really cared. You know? It wasn't until they jumped ship that people were kind of like, oh, like these guys are really good. And now they're bolstering the already very strong mid-card of the WWF. But I didn't see this as being a huge mistake. You know, like these guys were really good, all of them, you know, talented guys, but they weren't going to main event Starrcade. They weren't going to be superstars. They just weren't. So I don't see this as being a big, huge mistake. All right. So putting it into context, number 7 will have to be overexpanding the NWO. Now, the reason why they expanded the NWO in the first place, and Eric Bischoff had said this, and it has been something that has been confirmed again and again, they were going to consume WCW with the NWO. That was the plan. So that means expanding the NWO was always a part of the plan. It was never a mistake. They had always planned to have a very large force in the NWO. They had their own pay-per-views. They had their own referees. They did all that stuff on purpose. Now, you could say it was a mistake to do that, and it was silly, and nobody cared about that, and they shouldn't have done it. But within context, they were giving the people what they wanted. They wanted more people in the NWO. Fans did. You know, it was all about who was going to join the NWO next. Who was going to, kind of their version of who's going to jump ship. Because they did start doing random heel turns in the NWO. That's just, within context, it wasn't that big of a deal. Now, the issue that I have is with some of the guys that they brought in. Virgil, Beefcake, Scott Norton. I know Scott Norton was a big deal in Japan. We ain't talking about Japan, okay? We're talking about right here in the United States of America. Nobody gave a shit about Scott Norton, okay? I've seen funerals with more noise than a Scott Norton match. In any event, overextending the NWO was always the point. It was always what they were going to do. So it wasn't really a mistake. Now, because it was intentional, so it wasn't a mistake. So by its very nature, it can't be at the very bottom, because it was actually something they intentionally did. All right, so let's go on to number 6. Ending Goldberg's streak was number 6. Now, the reason why I say this wasn't WCW's biggest mistake is simply because Goldberg needed to lose anyway. And you may have said, hey, it can't be to Kevin Nash. Hey, it can't be to a cattle prod. It wasn't a cattle prod. It was a taser. It can't be because of a taser. What they did was stupid. It was foolish. Goldberg was the best thing they had going. And my thing is, how long do you think an undefeated streak could possibly last? He had already been undefeated for so long. He needed to lose. The thing is, he needed to lose to get the loss out of the way. You also had this issue, and I think Kevin Nash talked about this, where people were starting to turn on him because his matches were predictable. You knew what was going to happen. Goldberg was going to win. His opponent was going to throw everything at him. He was going to power through and win. And people were kind of like, that's kind of formulaic. We didn't really like that. I mean, it was great when he got to the championship and that happened, but it continued even after he won the championship. Like, there was no threats to Goldberg. So he needed to lose, if for no other reason than to establish that he can be beaten. And now you have created that drama in every Goldberg match, that he's not some bulletproof, unbeatable, monster anymore. He can be beaten. But just because you can beat him doesn't mean you will. And I can criticize the finish of that match till I'm blue in the face. Kevin Nash probably shouldn't have been the guy. If they'd have waited a little bit longer, they might have had Sid on the roster in 99. I think Bam Bam Bigelow was coming on in at some point. Either one of them would have been better choices than Kevin Nash. Now, I know why they picked Kevin Nash. Kevin Nash was over, and he would have been a good heel. He had, a tremendous amount of size. He would have been a good heel for Goldberg to chase. But Goldberg losing, to me, wasn't that big a mistake. It was probably bad timing, but it was also the issue of it being NWO stuff, as people were kind of over the NWO. So I will say that. I will say that was, not a concern. I didn't like that. So the next thing I'm going to go with is giving Hulk Hogan creative control. This one was, this was definitely a mistake. But at the same time, you have to put it within context. Hulk Hogan was the biggest star in the history of the business up to this point. And you had the opportunity to sign him to a contract. And you say, what do you want, Hogan? what will it take to put your name on this dotted line? Now, WCW was essentially at this point in time losing a ton of money. It was a podunk company. Hogan was doing them a favor even coming in. So giving them creative control pretty much made sense. You know, sure, he would exercise it in a way that was detrimental to the company in the long term. You know, but he was one of these guys, man, who, if you're going to give anybody real control over their own career, it would be Hulk Hogan. And then you're WCW. You're the not just number 2 wrestling promotion in the world. You're a distant number 2. You know, if you go back and again, if you read some of the stuff about WCW, they were essentially paying fans to show up. You know, they were not doing good business at all when Hogan became a free agent. They got lucky that Hogan was even interested in going to WCW. But Hogan was motivated by basically Vince telling him that he was done and putting him out to pasture like an old horse. And so he was already motivated to come to WCW. But then he's like, hey, if I can get creative control, and you're like, if that's what it takes to get you to show up, let's do it. So within context, I think it's smart business to give Hulk Hogan creative control. Now, I think once you saw what he was going to do with it, you know, it came across as a mistake. But Bischoff didn't know that Hogan was an egomaniac. He had no idea. He was just trying to make his program better. And he figured, hell, even if Hogan doesn't have much left in the tank, he's better than what we got now. You know, and at least we got the name associated with our brand, and we can, you know, move to do things on a bigger and better scale, which is what they did. And so in the long term, it was a good decision in context. All right, another decision that made sense in context was hiring Vince Russo. This was, you know, Vince Russo coming from the WWF. He's like, I'm the head writer of Raw. He didn't lie. He was the head writer of Raw. He's like, I'm responsible for Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock and D-Generation X and for everything that the WWF is doing very well. If you are a guy sitting in an office in WCW, you don't know the inner workings of the WWF. This guy's coming to you and saying, I'm the head writer of Monday Night Raw. I am the reason why they are so successful. And you say to yourself, we're in a head-to-head competition with that brand. If we can poach their top writer, then this is a good idea. In the long term, it's a good idea. You didn't know that Vince Russo was an egomaniac that was going to come in, start doing ridiculous things and, you know, ruin the brand and the image of your product. You had no idea he was going to do that. Right? Because you assume that the reason why WWF is getting good ratings is because of this guy's ideas. So he's got good ideas. You know, it's no different than anybody else who sells themselves in a job interview. And then they come in and they do something silly. You know, they show up to work drunk, you know, or, you know, they can't pass the physical or they can't pass the drug test or whatever the case may be. It was almost literally the same thing here. Vince Russo pitched himself as being the visionary behind Monday Night Raw. The WCW staff believed it because why wouldn't they? You know, it's literally on his resume, you know, and, you know, you have some idea that this guy is not lying. So you think that it's all going to work out, and then it doesn't. So bringing him back was probably the dumbest part. Like once you... See, that's what the thing about this stuff. Some of this stuff wasn't bad at first, but them doubling and tripling down on Russo is what made it a mistake. Like when he, you know, pitched a bitch and quit the first time, you know, and you had to remove him from Power like 6 months in, and then you brought him back. That was a mistake. And then letting him quit and then come back again, that was a mistake. But hiring him in the first place, no, that was not a mistake. Just about anybody who was in a fight for their lives in terms of head-to-head competition, just like signing Hulk Hogan, if you can think you can take a piece of the WWF and bring some of that success over to WCW, you would do it. And nobody can sit and say they wouldn't. All of this stuff, requires for you to look back in time and say, this was a bad decision. No, hiring Vince Russo wasn't that bad of a decision, because you don't know who Vince Russo is. You don't know what his track record is. You don't know how much he really put into Monday Night Raw. He could have done 99% of it for all you know. Imagine if Vince Russo goes to Brad Siegel and tries to get hired as a writer. Brad Siegel's like, no, we don't want anything to do with you. And then WCW continues to sink. And then the dirt sheets say Vince Russo went to WCW in 1999 and said, hey, sign me up. I don't have a contract. And then they said, we don't need writers. Get out of here. People would have been laughing like, oh, they had this huge opportunity to sign the best writer that WWF ever had, and they didn't take it. But with the benefit of 21 years of hindsight, we know that Vince Russo is a crackpot idiot who can't write his way out of a paper bag. But in 1999, they didn't know that. And people still believe Vince Russo had 100% creative control in WWF, which never happened. Never. The filter ain't real, bro. Yes, it is. But in context, hiring Vince Russo, not a mistake. So the third in the next spot, we're gonna have making Kevin Nash a booker. This was, again, having the guys book themselves makes no sense. It's silly. But to me, I don't know how bad of an idea it was, because I didn't really study the Kevin Nash years, well, less than a year actually, that he was the booker of WCW. I think they probably just wanted a fresh voice. He ended up just being part of the committee. This doesn't matter. That's the thing. Like, once it was part of a committee, you can't really just blame Nash for it. It was a committee decision. Everybody had to get together and make this thing a decision. Yes, we know Kevin Nash kind of wanted to screw around with the cruiserweights, and he wanted to bury some guys. He did the whole vanilla midgets thing. And I think from that perspective, putting him on the booking committee was wrong, because he alienated so many people with his attitude and him not giving a shit really about WCW. And I think this was around the time, because I think they said Kevin Nash kind of checked out around the time Scott Hall will start having his alcohol problems. And I think this was in the Nitro book that Nash and Hall, I can tell you exactly when it was. When they fired Six, X-Pac. When he got fired, Hall and Nash really stopped caring about WCW. And they pretty much said it in the book that they had tried to keep Waltman around. But when Bischoff just made the decision to fire him, then Hall and Nash basically just said, okay, this is just a job. We don't care anymore. We're not going to Bischoff with ideas anymore. We're not going to help pitch anything anymore. We're just going to show up and get paid. So now I'm guessing this is a year or two after that, and he feels like he can actually help the company again. And since he was there pitching ideas during the times when things were good, there's this concept, it's called last known good, where if you find something and it doesn't work anymore, and you try to figure out when was the last time it did work. So if you're Eric, just say Eric Bischoff, because I'm pretty sure Eric Bischoff wasn't around this time, but let's just say you were in the WCW office, and you say, when was the last time this show got really good ratings? And you can say, well, it was when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash were pitching ideas to Eric Bischoff. They came up with this and this and this and all this stuff. And you say, well, how do we just make Kevin Nash the booker? You can't make Scott Hall the booker, of course. He's a drunk, so you can't do that. But Nash, sure, let's do it. Why not? I mean, he's one of the boys, so he knows the business. So from that perspective, he's never written TV or anything like that before, but it's a committee. So there's a bunch of people here who have written TV before. We can plug up some of the weaknesses that he comes up with. We can just use him as a generator of ideas. It sounds fine when you put it from in that perspective, like it's not really that big of a deal. So I really didn't see this as being a bad decision. Putting it in context wasn't that bad of a decision. Now, the last two, of course, without question, bad decisions. Even in context, these decisions made zero sense. So, in the number 2 position, I'm going to go with the finger poke of doom. Now, the reason why the finger poke of doom is not the worst is simply because there was a plan for the finger poke of doom. Kevin Nash has always stated that the entire plan was to rebuild Goldberg, to create another set of heels for Goldberg to have to tear through, and to reheat him after his loss. That was the plan. They didn't get to that point because I think Goldberg hurt his hand. Is this around the time when Goldberg was punching windows with his bare hands and then broken his arm or something like that? So it didn't really quite work out the way that it did. But even in context, just having Kevin Nash lay down and give Hogan the belt was a huge mistake. Even in context, it was a mistake because people were already kind of over the NWO. So even in context, this was a big mistake. You had something fresh with Goldberg. You had something that could have been fresh with Goldberg and Nash. And you could have done Nash as the new leader of the NWO and you could have taken Hogan somewhere else. They had a plan for this. But even with a plan for it, it really didn't make sense to just have Nash give up the belt that he just worked forever to get. It just made no sense. It's stupid. But and number 1 is putting the title on David Arquette, which is a Vince Russo idea. This was a huge mistake. This was creatively WCW's biggest mistake. Because you spit in the face of everybody who had been the world champion before. You spit in the face of the fans. I mean, you had these guys, right? Go to circle back. You had Malenko, Benoit, Guerrero, and Saturn. These guys who are busting their ass because they want to be top guys. And you're not even giving them a chance. You're not even want to give them a chance. Like, you gave Benoit a shot, really. But really, did you really? Again, he wasn't really mixing in with none of the top guys. So, and you look at all of those guys and you say, none of you can be world champion. But David Arquette, who is skinnier than all of you, has no skills, is not really drawing an audience, really. Like, I get it, he's an actor, and he's, you think that he's a big Hollywood celebrity. He's not, by the way. But let's say you think that he was. He's not really drawing an audience for your show. He wasn't even drawing an audience to the movie theaters. I can't think of David Arquette busting the bank on any Hollywood blockbusters. This is not Arnold Schwarzenegger here. Like, if you was to make Arnold Schwarzenegger the world champion, or Sylvester Stallone, let's say you wanted to make a world champion out of somebody who was an actor, and you chose Arnold Schwarzenegger at the height of Terminator and Total Recall. Like, say Vince decided to put the belt on Arnold in 1986 or something like that. I'd have been like, yeah, even if it didn't work out and it turned out to be complete and total shit, you can look at it like, okay, Arnold was a huge draw. I would take that chance. Because what if it works? Everything is a gamble. But what was this going to do? What was putting the title on David Arquette ever meant to do? Russo says, well, we were looking to get free publicity. Big publicity. Everybody's talking about it. And I'm like, man, you talk about being shallow. The amount of, man, like the guy it was ridiculous. Like, even to this day, 21 years later, this had to be a stupid idea when it came out of his mouth. That's the thing about this whole thing. Like, you can, in context, you can see how some people make bad decisions, but it seemed like a good idea at the time. You want to start up a restaurant. You don't know nothing about running restaurants. You think that, okay, I can cook food and sell it. It is what it is. I'm going to go open my own restaurant. And then you get in the thick of it and you're like, oh no, this ain't working the way I thought it would. And then you bail. That's how most decisions are made. But in this type of thing, it's dumb when it comes out of somebody's mouth. Hey, how about we make that skinny ass actor the world champion? People are like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's some shit a guy is trying to sabotage his own career if he was to say something like that. And I can't believe they actually go and did it. And then he put the belt on himself. So it was this was WCW's biggest mistake because they tarnished their world title. They shit all over it. They spit in the face of every fan who ever gotten into a world championship match. They spit in the face of every wrestler who ever sat back and was in the back and wanted really to be the world champion. And guys who hadn't gotten there yet and was like, oh my God, I can't, but like all I have to do is be a D-list actor and I can be world champion. Oh, I'm worth less than a D-list world actor? You can't justify that decision, man. You can't justify that decision no other way than I didn't give a shit. That just shows that Russo did not give a shit about WCW. He didn't give a damn. And this was the biggest mistake in WCW history, bar none. Even with added context, it don't get worse than this. All right, so let me know what you guys think. Feel free to rank these things in the comment section below. Like your video, share this video, subscribe to the channel. Feel free to donate to the channel if you can. And I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace.
Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap. They distort so question as if you worship.